Hi everyone and welcome to chapter 4. Now this is a really difficult chapter to understand. We'll have a lot of interest rate terminologies. So I would urge you to read this chapter at least twice. It is very difficult to understand in one go. So in this chapter we are going to discuss about different type of interest rates and how to use those interest rates, what is continuous compounding, and finally what are forward agreements. So there are different types of interest rates that you would encounter. So first is treasury rate, LIBOR, Fed's fund rate, repo rate, then swap rates, etc. So there are different types of interest rates a finance student or a finance professional encounters. Now what is interest rate? Interest rate is simply when you borrow funds, what you pay, and when you lend funds, what you get. Interest rate is simple as that. You borrow funds, you get something, that is the interest rate. You lend your funds to someone, whatever you get is the interest rates, that is we are going to discuss. Now in this chapter and in throughout the book, interest rates are noted as basis points. So everything, like they will say interest rates are going up by 150 basis point or they are changing by 200 basis point. So what is basis point? Basis point is an equation where 100 basis points equals 1%. So if I'm saying 200 basis point, it means 2%. If I'm saying 300 basis point, it means 3%. So 100 basis point equals 1%. That is the equation that you have to remember. So let's start. So first is treasury rate. Treasury rates are instruments that are issued by government in its own currency. For example, we are in Canada, so for us the treasury rate will be whatever rate we are getting on Bank of Canada treasury bills and treasury bonds, because Bank of Canada would issue bonds and bills in the same Canadian dollars that we are using. So rate on instruments issued by the corresponding government in its own currency is called as treasury rates. Now in America, the treasury rates will be on Fed bonds, like Fed bills and Fed bonds. So Federal Reserve is the central bank in America. So whatever rates the bank lends or borrows at, right, Federal Reserve lends and borrows at will become treasury rates. Now treasury rates are assumed to have no risk involved in them. The reason is, if government starts to have issues with money, they can always print more money. So it is unlikely that a government would default on the bonds it has issued in its own currency. It may default on bonds issued in some other currency, but it cannot default on bonds issued in the same currency. So that's why treasury rates or treasury bills or bonds are considered to be risk free. But we do not use them when we consider risk free, we use something else. There are issues with treasury rates that we will discuss. The next rate that you would encounter as a finance professional is something called as LIBOR. So LIBOR is London Interbank Rate, right? So why is LIBOR? How is LIBOR constructed? So what does Bank of London do? Bank of London will ask 18 credit-worthy banks, 18 top banks in the world, not in London, 18 top banks in the world. So it will be JP Morgan, Bank of Canada, Royal Bank of Canada, right? Then let's say banks like Bank of China. It will ask them how much rate would you charge to lend and how much rate would you charge to borrow. So it will get that rate from these banks. So 18 banks are asked how much rate you are going to ask for, lending and ask for borrowing. And out of that, from that rates, it will remove top 4 rates, like top lowest 4 rates and highest 4 rates. So once again, it will ask 18 top financial institutions what are the rates they are going to charge for borrowing and lending. And once it gets those rates, top 4, the lowest 4 are removed, highest 4 are removed, and then it averages it out. So this is the mechanism of finding LIBOR. Now LIBOR was an industry standard, like derivative pricing. When I studied my CFA some 10 years back, it was all LIBOR based. So LIBOR was used for derivatives pricing. This is the interest rate that all analysts and all pricing professionals used. But there was a lot of issues with LIBOR in recent times. Means there was a huge scam where all 18 financial banks were collaborating with each other to control interest rates, and that was not market determined. These were bank determined. So LIBOR means derivative pricing right now is means done on overnight index swaps rather than LIBOR, but LIBOR is still used in some kinds of derivative pricing. So LIBOR is the rate of interest at which AA banks can borrow money on an unsecured basis from other banks. One more important thing, LIBOR is unsecured. There is no collateral required, right? For 10 currencies and maturity ranging from 1 days to 12 months, it is calculated daily by the British Bankers Association from submissions from almost 18 major banks in the world. So it is LIBOR is calculated for each currency. So how much do they charge for dollar lending? How much do they charge for pound lending? How much do they charge for euro lending? How much do they charge for Canadian dollars? So it is done for all currencies. There have been some suggestions that banks manipulated LIBOR during certain periods. So that is the reason it is not used much. The next is US Fed fund rate. So US Fed fund rate is also unsecured, so there is no collateral involved. So what is Fed fund rate? So all US banks have to keep some deposits with the Federal Reserve. Now these deposits are based on mismatch between assets and liabilities. So all banks have assets, all banks have liabilities. So loans that banks issue are assets because it is going to be paid on that, and whatever deposit the banks have is its liability. So it is little reverse from normal company. Whatever loan the bank issues, these are assets for the banks. Whatever liabilities, whatever deposit the bank gets is the liability. So if there is a mismatch between assets and liabilities, then the Federal Reserve asks for some deposits. Now there are certain times when banks have more assets than liabilities, so they have a positive balance with Federal Reserve, and certain times they have negative balance. If they have positive balance, they lend it to companies that they lend it to banks that need it, and if they have a negative balance, they will borrow from banks that have it. So there is continuous overnight borrowing between banks to meet Federal Reserve requirements. So once again, Federal Reserve mandates that banks keep deposits with Federal Reserve if there is a mismatch between assets and liability, that is liabilities are more than assets. Now certain banks do not meet those requirements, so they have to keep reserves with Feds. So they will borrow from other banks to meet those requirements. Now the rate that the other banks charge for overnight borrowing, the rate that other banks are charging for overnight borrowing that is happening is called as US Fed fund rate. So it allows banks to adjust the cash, that is reserves on deposit, with Federal Reserve at the end of each day. The effective Fed fund rate is the average rate on the brokered transaction. So these transactions are brokered. So an average is calculated on which bank borrowed from which and all those things. The central banks may intervene when it own transactions to lower the rate or increase the rate. So whenever we say that central bank is intervening in money markets, so central bank will lend or borrow on its own at a preferable rate to either increase the interest rates or to decrease the interest rates. So it may happen. Similar arrangements are there in all countries. So it happens in Canada as well. The Bank of Canada requires all Canadian banks to have reserves based on asset liabilities mismatch. One important thing to note, the balances, the capital requirement in Canada are much higher than capital requirement in America. So our banks have to keep much higher deposits with Bank of Canada than they have to in Americas. Next is repo rate. Now what is repo rate? Repo means repurchase rate. So repurchase is two banks are transacting with each other and the bank that is borrowing is putting some collateral. So it is saying, it is making an agreement that I am borrowing 100 million. I am keeping this collateral maybe in form of gold, maybe in form of securities, right? I am keeping this collateral with you, and after let's say 2 days or 90 days I am going to pay you back. So this is a repurchase agreement. So bank borrows from the other bank, keeps some collateral and takes money, but it also agrees to pay back. So these are secured rates. So repurchase agreement is an agreement where a financial institution that owns securities agrees to sell them today for X and buy them back later. So when you sell an obligation, you get money. So you're borrowing, but you're agreeing to pay them back. The financial institutions essentially obtains a loan, but this is a secure transaction. So in this case, they have some collateral. The rate of interest is calculated from difference between X and Y, that is how much you are taking versus how much you are going to pay back. So difference between that is the rate of interest and is known as repo rate. Now, like we discussed, major derivatives are used, like once again, LIBOR is the most followed interest rates whenever we are discussing about swaps and other kinds of derivatives. So in derivative pricing or in derivative transaction, LIBOR is still the most followed rate, but the instances of using LIBOR has slowly decreasing. Right now, the most common swap is LIBOR based. Now you have to understand what is swap. So I'm going to discuss it in an Excel sheet because it's little bit difficult to understand and the book doesn't do justice to it. So let it open. So what is a swap? These are also called as forward rate agreements when you are discussing interest rates. So what is that? Like, what does that mean? It means there are two parties, party A and party B. So party A has, let's say, it's going to receive floating rate. Now that floating rate can be LIBOR, it can be overnight indexed swap rate, anything. So it receives floating, right? Party B pays floating. Okay, there are two parties. Party A is receiving floating, party B is paying floating. Now both of them have risk that interest rates would change. Change risk. Now what is the risk that party A has? It is receiving floating. So it is going to receive LIBOR or it is going to receive some other floating rate. Let's say the Fed rate. Now it has a risk that interest rate may go down. While party B has a risk that interest rate may go up. So it has to pay floating rate. So if interest rate starts going up, what is floating rate? Floating rate is market determined. It's not a fixed rate. So if interest rates start going up, then the party B has to pay out more. So they have opposite risk profiles. So what would they do? They will get into a swap arrangement and they will buy a forward rate agreement, FRA. Now what does that mean? So party A will get into an arrangement where it is going to receive floating rate. So that floating rate it is going to pay. So it is going to get into an agreement where it will pay floating and receive a fixed rate. Any kind of swap or any kind of FRA is a way of converting floating into fixed, right? One way to do it is you pay floating rate, so you pay LIBOR or you pay Fed rate and you receive a fixed rate. Let's say this fixed rate is 3%. So whatever is the interest rate going on in the market, you keep on paying that and you receive a fixed payment, right? The other way to do it is you pay fixed and you receive floating. So this is a swap of an FRA. So parties that have interest rate risk, their cash flows depend on interest rates. They can hedge that risk by using a swap or an FRA, where they get into an agreement to convert floating rate into fixed rate. Okay. So how to do that? There are two ways to do it. Either you pay floating and receive fixed, or you pay fixed and you receive a floating rate. Now 19% of the cases, this floating rate is LIBOR. It may be LIBOR plus or minus some percentage, but it is generally LIBOR. So you generally pay LIBOR and receive a fixed rate if you get into a swap arrangement, or you pay a fixed rate and you receive LIBOR. So 99% of the case it is LIBOR. So most common swap is where LIBOR is exchanged for a fixed rate, or other way around too. The swap rate where 3-month LIBOR is exchanged for a fix has the same risk as a series of continually repressed loans for a AA bank. So what they are saying is, generally the settlement happens every 3 months. That's the most common arrangement. So even if you're getting into an forward rate or a swap agreement for 5 years, every 3 months netting would be done. So if you're making money from this arrangement, you're paying floating but you're receiving fixed. So if floating is less than fixed, you'll make money. So if you're making money, every 3 months you receive it. If you're not making money, if you're in loss, you have to pay. But settlement occurs, like small settlement netting occurs every 3 months, because 5 years, 10 years, you can get into a 30-year arrangement. But these time periods are very large, and banks' credit ratings can change. So if a bank is struggling, then it may not be able to pay you. So even though the agreements can last for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, but the settlement, like the netting will occur every 3 months. Okay. We have already discussed LIBOR has its own problems. So this rate is now used more. So an overnight indexed swap is a swap where a fixed rate, 3 months rate, is exchanged for a geometric average of overnight rates, right? For maturities up to 1 year, there is a single exchange. For maturities beyond a year, there is periodic exchange of every quarter. OIS is continually refreshed. So I'll explain it here. So what is an OIS rate? OIS rate, overnight index swap rate, is the rate you receive, is the current rate that you receive, right, on a 3-month swap arrangement. So what is happening? So let's say I'm going to get OIS, like overnight index swap, of 4%, right, annual 4% for the next 3 months. So what is this 4%? How did I get this 4%? So this 4% is achieved by geometric mean of everyday forward rate for 3 months. Now I'll explain one by one. So first of all, what is a forward rate? Forward rate is expectation of interest rate. So what I'm doing, so let's say this is September 20. So if I get into an agreement right now, what rate will I receive? So I will receive geometric mean of expectation of next 30 days. So I'll just add 1 day. So I'm purposefully using dates. So this was day 1, day 2. So we are looking at a 30-day rate. So this was 20. So these are the next 30 days. Okay. So what does geometric mean? Geometric mean is, okay, before geometric mean, what are forward rates? Forward rates are market expectations on how much the interest rate would be today. So let's say it is 1%. How much the interest rate will be tomorrow. So let's say it is 0.9. There is expectation that interest rate will go down. So 0.9%. Okay. Expectation it will go to 1.1%. And so on. So these are forward rate expectations for the next 30 days. It is up, it is down, whatever, random. So the rate that you get on overnight index swap is the geometric average of all these forward rates. Now these are forward rates. Forward rate means expectations. So geometric mean of expectations. So I'm not going to cover what is a geometric mean. You need to know basic maths to do that. But geometric mean of all these interest rates. So it is somewhere about 1.62%. So geometric mean of all these interest rates is the overnight index swap. Okay. Now that is this one, OIS rate. An overnight index swap is where a fixed rate, so this fixed rate 1.62% is paid for 3 months of overnight rate. Now overnight rate, these are expectations, right, of the market. The actual rates may be different. So if actual rate is more, you will get paid, like the payouts will happen. Whoever is lending and whoever is borrowing, depends on that. So if actual rate is more, payouts will happen. Actual rate is less, payouts will happen. If actual rate is equal to the forward rates, no payouts will happen. Okay. So if the maturity is up to 1 year, the exchange happens at the end. But if maturity is beyond 1 year, then the exchange happens every quarter, that is every 3 months. OIS rate is continuously refreshed overnight rate. Now risk-free rate, generally people assume that risk-free rates consider our treasury rates, but that's not the case. Treasury rate is not considered to be risk-free. The reason is they are artificially low because banks, whenever they buy treasury bills or treasury bonds, they are not required to keep collateral, or they borrow from Fed, they are not required to keep collateral. So it is artificially low for that. Second, treasury bills also have some favorable tax treatment. So in United States, whenever you invest in T-bills or T-bonds, you do not have to pay Fed tax. But in other risk-free instruments, you have to pay, like you do not have to pay state tax. But in other risk-free instruments, you have to pay state tax. So that is why it is artificially low. OIS rates are now used as proxy for risk-free rate. So treasury bills are not considered to be risk-free rate, even though in low-level finance courses we always assume T-bill rate to be risk-free, but that's not the case. In actual finance profession, overnight indexed swaps are used as risk-free. Next is measuring interest rates. The compounding frequency used for interest rates is unit of measurement. The difference between annual compounding is a difference between miles and kilometers. So what does that mean is, I'll open an Excel sheet and explain it there. So you're investing $100 for 1 year, and they're saying compounding, the interest rate is, let's say 10%, but the compounding frequency is different. In the first case, you get interest at the end, right? So only once the interest is going to be paid at the end of 1 year. So how much are you going to make? 10% into 100, that is 10. So annual rate is also 10%. But if you are going to make 10% divided by 2, so 5% every 6 months, so you're going to be paid every 6 months instead of getting paid annually. So what would happen? First 6 months get over, you get $5. That $5 you again reinvest at 10%. So effectively what you're making, $5 that you received is going to compound for half a year. So it's going to become $5.24 plus you get $5 at the end. So effectively you're going to make 5 plus 5.24, so 10.24. So your effective rate, if it is compounded every 6 months, becomes 10.244. So what does that mean? As the frequency of payment increases, if you are paid once, annual rate is the effective rate. But if you are paid twice in a year, so whatever you paid like initially for 6 months, you can reinvest that. So your effective rate goes up. If you are paid every quarter, your effective rate still goes up, and so on and so forth. So if you did it, so 6 month rate, quarterly rate, then monthly rate, then let's say weekly rate, then daily rate, and there is something called as continuous rate. So how much would you make? So we know 6 months we are going to make 10.24. One other way to calculate it is 1 plus effective rate, 1 plus the stated rate, divided by frequency, that is you're going to be paid twice, to the power frequency minus 1. So it is 10.244 to be very precise. If you expect 10.25, close to this. Okay. So if you do that for quarterly, it will be 1 plus the stated rate, 10%. Quarter is 4 quarters in a year, so you're going to be paid 4 times a year, to the power 4 minus 1. So it is 10.38%. If it is monthly, you'll be paid 12 times in a year, so 1 plus 10% divided by 12 to the power 12 minus 1. Then weekly, it will be 1 plus 10% to the power, divided by 52 weeks in a year, to the power 52 minus 1. Daily, it will be 1 plus 10% divided by 365 days in a year, to the power 365 minus 1. And continuous is, compounding is happening infinitely, so it is happening every second. So it is the theoretical limit on anything. Now continuous compounding is important because whenever we discount or we compound, we always use continuous compounding. So continuous compounding is calculated by e to the power of interest rates. So continuous compounding is calculated by e to the power of interest rate into time. Okay. So e to the power of RC, m into power e to the power of RC minus 1. So these two formulas, so I'll show it to you on Excel, but first I'll copy it. Okay. So it will be exponential, e is exponential function, to the power %, minus 1. So it is 10.17. So this is, so continuous compounding is the theoretical limit that you place on how much maximum payment could be. Now continuous compounding is important because by using continuous compounding we find out valuations of derivatives. So whenever we discount cash flows or we take it to the future, compound them, we use continuous compounding. Now how to use continuous compounding? So let's say you are investing $100 and there is continuous compounding at 12% for the next 5 years. So you are investing $100, the continuous compounding is 12% and it is for the next 5 years. So it will be 100 principal multiplied by exponential e to the power 10%, 12% in this case, into n is 5. So your $100 will become 182. If it was annual, it will be 100 multiplied by 1 plus 12% to the power 5. So it is 176. So can you see, continuous compounding will result in more money. Okay. Now if you want to discount it, so let's say you are going to get $200 after 5 years. So you want to find out the interest rate. So how do you, like, how much money interest rate is given to you? So let's say it is 9%. So you want to find out how much money should I invest at 9% for 5 years, so that because of continuous compounding I get $200. Now how do you do that? You discount it. How do you discount? $200 is multiplied by exponential exp function. Interest rate was 9% into 5, but this is minus now. So signs are negative. So you are discounting. Discounting is minus. So you have to invest $127 today at 9% for 5 years to get $200. So this is compounding and discounting, but we are using exponentials instead of normal way, future value and present value. So when you are doing these problems on calculator, you use e to the power x or e to the power minus x into n, right? So e is the function that you use when you are using calculators. So this is what they are saying, like as the frequency increases, the money that the return that you get, the money that you make increases. Continuous compounding is the theoretical limit. It is 100 into power e to the power r, interest rate into time. So there are ways to convert exponential, means ways to find out interest rate when normal interest, annual interest rate is given, and way to find out annual interest rate when compounding interest rate is given. For example, a 12% compounding interest, will be how much annual interest? So let's find it out. So for doing that, we use these formulas. I did copy them. I don't know where they went. Okay, so we are going to use these formulas. Let me shrink it, keep it here. So let's say we are given that continuous compounded rate is 12%. You have to find out what is the annual effective rate. Now how do you find out annual effective rate? We find this formula. We use this formula. It is m. M is the frequency. Frequency for annual is 1. So we use 1 into exponential, that is the function e to the power given rate 12% divided by 1 minus 1. So if the annual rate is, if the continuous compounded rate given is 12%, the annual effective rate becomes 12.75. Now if you want to find quarterly, So how would you do it? Quarterly is 4 quarters, 4 multiplied by exponential to the power interest rate 12% divide by 4, frequency is 4, then minus 1. So it is 12.18. Now other way around, if you are given annual rate and you want to find out continuous, how to do that? So annual rate is given to be 12%. So what is the continuous rate? Continuous rate should be smaller generally. So let's find out continuous. So when e goes to the other side, it becomes a log function. When exponential goes from left hand side to right hand side or right hand side to left hand side, when it changes the equal to signs, it becomes log function. Minus becomes plus, multiplication becomes division, subtraction becomes addition, but exponential becomes log. So we are converting annual into continuous. So 1 into log equal to sign, I didn't put 1 into log one plus Rm divided by n. So 1 plus interest rate is 12% divided by 1. So it is 1 plus 12%. If you do, yeah, so annual rate of continuous is too low. It should be somewhere around 11. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. Why did that happen? So let's do it for, let's say, quarterly. We want to find out quarterly rate 4, and this should be divided by 4. So it is doing right, but base 1. Base should be 1. The base should be 10. Normally base is 10. Well, let us see. 2 with semi-annual compounding is 2 logarithm of 1.05. So this function we are using wrong. So it should be ln, natural log, not base 10 log. That was the problem. So this is okay. So it is natural log of 1 plus 12. There is a difference between base 10 log and a natural log. So they are using natural log. That's why. So if you do enter, it should be 11.33. So if annual is 12%, continuous is 11.33. So if you look at quarterly rate, so if you find out 10% quarterly is how much continuous, so it is equals to frequency 4 quarters in a year into natural log ln 1 plus 10% divided by 4. So it is 9.8%. So that was wrong. So you always use natural log instead of log 10. Okay. So continuous compounding, the concept is as the frequency increases, the rate of return increases. How to discount and compound we have seen. So to compound we use principal multiplied by exponential interest rate to the power into number of years. If to discount we use minus subtraction. Now we have seen how to convert from continuous to annual, and the other way around, like if 12% annual is the given, how much is continuous, etc. So we have done both these things. Okay, so let's go back to slides. So continuous compounding, when we compound m times per year, the principal grows higher. In continuous compounding, it is the limit. As we compound more and more frequency, we obtain continuous compounding interest rates. $100 grows to 100 into e to the power interest rate into t, that is time. So we have seen how to compound. 100 received is discounted by using minus sign at time 0. Then we have also seen conversion formulas, how to find out compounding means continuous compounding rate when other rate is given, and how to find out other rate like the stated rate when continuous compounding rate is given. So they have given few examples. 10% with semi-annual compounding is equivalent to 2 ln 1.05, that is 1 plus 5, 10% divided by 2, that is 9.75 with continuous compounding. 8% with continuous compounding is equivalent to 4 e to the power m divided e to the power I divided by m. So 4 e to the power 8% divided by 4 minus 1. So 8.08 with quarterly compounding. Rate used in option pricing are usually expressed as continuous compounding. That's why whenever you are discounting and compounding in terms of derivatives or in terms of options, we always use continuous compounding. Now there is a concept of zero rate. So what is a zero rate? Zero rate is the zero coupon bond rate, risk free zero coupon bond rate that you are getting for the particular time frame. For what does that mean? So that means if this is given to you like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so we are dealing with 5-year zero coupon bonds, and the yield of risk-free zero coupon bonds, yield of risk-free zero coupon bonds. So it is something like, let's say this one, 2%, 2.23%, 2.5%, 4 like 3%, 5%, or let's say 3.2%. So you'll see something like this when you see quotes of zero coupon bonds. So 1 year zero coupon bond is making 2%. 2 year zero coupon bond is giving you 2.23% every year, because they are using your money for a longer time frame. So they have to give you more money. So longer is the time frame, higher is the interest rate generally. So 1 year zero coupon is giving you 2% per year. 2 year zero coupon bond is giving you 2.23% per year. A 3 year zero coupon bond is giving you 2.5% per year. A 4 year zero coupon is 3 and 5 year is 3.2 per year. So this is per year. So you are not making 3.2% in total. You are going to make 3.2% for 5 years. So it is effectively every year you are going to make 3.2%. So a zero rate or a spot rate for maturity T is the rate of interest earned on an investment that provides payoff only at time T. So a zero coupon bond that matures at time T, whatever is the yield, that is the zero rate. Example, this is given to you like a 6 month is paying you 5% yearly effective, 1 year is paying you 5.8% yearly effective, 1.5 is paying you 6.4% yearly effective, 2 is giving you 6.8% every year. So whenever you are pricing bonds, to calculate the cash price of the bond, we discount each cash flow at appropriate zero rate. In our example, the theoretical price of a 2-year bond providing 6% coupon is given. So what is happening? They are giving you these rates. So let me copy it. This is little tricky to understand, so we're going to spend some time there. So they have given you these rates. Okay, zero rates, zero coupon equivalent rates for 6 months, 1 year, 1.5 years and 2 years. And you have to value a 2-year bond a 2-year bond paying you 6% coupon. Okay, so if you are valuing a 2-year bond paying you 6% coupon where the notional principal is $100, like the face value is 100, what are the cash flows you are going to get? So every 6 months you are going to get $6 divided by 2. Sorry, so it is 6 divided, not question mark, divided by 2. So why? Because coupon rates are always mentioned yearly, but the coupon is paid semi-annually in this case. So 6 months you get $3, next you get $3, next you get $3, and when it ends you get $103. $100 face value plus $3 principal. Now generally what we do is, when we are pricing bonds, the approximate to value this bond is we find present value at a given rate. So we find present value of all these coupons. So if you're pricing this bond, it will be, rate is 5%, let's say, NPER is 2 years, so it should be 5% divided by 2 years, then 2 means 4 payments, then payment is $3, face value is $100, type is 0. This is how you value a bond. It should be $101. This is how you value it. But this is the wrong way to do it, because interest rates for time periods are different. For 6 months the zero coupon bond is paying 5%, but for 1 year bond it is paying 5.8%. For a 1.5 year bond it is giving you 6.4%, and a 2 year bond it is giving you 6.8. So the valuation of bond is different, right? In real life we don't value it using present value. How do we value it then? So we discount each cash flow by the corresponding rate. So you will discount $3. So $3 divided by 1 plus interest rate, that is 5%, right? And the time frame to the power 1 by 1/2 minus 1, and instead of 5% only half of it would be applicable, or it should be okay. So it is 1.92. If you discount this $3, you will discount by 1 plus interest rate. Now interest rate is 5.8%, and the number of years is 1.5 years, or 1 year to the power 1. So it is 2.83. You will discount this 3 by interest rate that is given 1 plus 6.4% and to the power 1 by 4. Sorry, 1.5. 1.5 years. And you will discount 103 by 1 plus discount. So divide 1 plus interest rate 6.8% to the power 2 years. And this should be in percentage. Okay, and finally you add everything up, that is your bond price. So your bond price is $100 something. So this is how you value a bond. Now one problem that we did is we discounted using non-continuous way. So we use normal discounting, but we have already discussed, like in actual reality everyone considers continuous discounting. So how do you do it continuous way? So this is by normal discounting. We don't do that. So what do? We use continuous discounting. So let's do that. So first one is 3 multiplied by exponential e to the power interest rate 5% into time frame 0.5, and since it is discounting, it should be negative sign, minus. So 2.92. Next 3 multiplied by exponential function interest rate 5.8% into 1 and before we close it should be negative sign because we are discounting. Next it is 3 multiplied by exponential function, interest rate is 6.4% into minus 1.5. I'm putting a minus sign. And last it is $103 that you're going to receive. You're going to discount it using 6.8% return. We always multiply it by n, but we are going to use minus n because we are discounting. And if you add everything up, it will be 98.38 or 39. So this is how you price a bond using zero rates. So each time frame you discount by a different rate and you use continuous compounding. Okay. Next is, sometimes you know the price but you have to find out yield. So what do? You put that price into the yield equation. So example, the bond yield is the discount rate which makes the present value of cash flows on the bond equal to the market bond. Suppose the market price is given to you 98.39 and you're given $3 you're going to get for 4 years and last you're going to be paid 103. Then you will use Y as your yield and try to compute yield. Now computation is not there in your syllabus, thank God, because for calculating it you have to use trial and error. There is it's very difficult to calculate it using this equation. So that's why the solution is not there. But you need to know, whenever you're using continuous compounding, you put the price in and then you know the cash flows, so you find out yield. Now next concept is par yield. Par yield is for a certain maturity is the coupon rate that causes the bond prices to equal the face value, same as bond yield. So bond yield and par yield is the same. So only difference is in bond yield you use the market price. So in par yield you're equating coupon payments to 100. So in the last case we were equating it to 98.39, that was the market price. But in this you're going to equate it to 100 and use the zero coupon rates and find out the coupon payment. So what are you going to do? You're going to assume that whenever bonds are issued, they are always issued at par. So you need to find out how much coupon I need to pay. So you will use zero rates and discount you will find out the coupon payments. So instead of finding the bond yield, you would use zero rates to discount each cash flows and equate it to 100. Again, not there for calculation purposes, it has to be done by trial and error. In general, if M is the number of coupon payments per year and D is the present value of $1 received at maturity, A is the value of annuity, right? Then C, coupon rate, is given by C is equal to 100 minus 100 to the power D, M and A. In our example, they have given M is 2, frequency is 2, D is the discount rate of 100, so that is 0.8724. So effectively that, and A is the coupon value, so do you divide it by coupon payments, you should get that. Okay. So